About 2 months ago, it occurred to me that I had not played a Final Fantasy game in over 5 years, and there was a real possibility that I would never play another Final Fantasy game for the rest of my life. Then a week later, I got this in the mail. Final Fantasy XIII takes us to Cocoon, a floating city in the sky, which is a sanctuary above the untamed hellscape of the earth below. The main characters come into contact with a magical creature that is forcing them to complete a mission or die trying. Naturally, the party isn't crazy about this, but they don't really have a choice in the matter, so they go off to complete their mission, and yet at the same time, they're trying to figure out a way not to die themselves, and not to kill everyone else in the world. Now let's take a look at the characters. Lightning, the main character. The first thing you're going to notice about her is her absolutely perfect character design. I mean, she is the best looking Final Fantasy heroine to date. Somehow they succeeded in making her look pretty in pink without also looking weak. Now this is no small feat. Take for example her sister, Sarah, who has the same pink hair and looks like a total wuss. Even across anime, it's hard to find a pink-haired character who actually looks tough. Some of you probably want to bring up Revolutionary Girl Utena right now, and yes, she's a strong character on the show, but just judging her on her character design alone, she looks like she'd go down with a quick kick to the shin. Just like every other character on that show, but that's besides the point. Anyway, Lightning is gorgeous. Unfortunately, like many women, she is less attractive once you get to know her. She's a little bitchy, and I realize that can be a cheap way to attack a female character, but in her case, she kinda deserves it. You see, Lightning's overprotective of her little sister, who wants to get married against Lightning's will. This kinda pisses Lightning off. And also her little sister was kinda turned into a crystal, and that also pissed Lightning off, so now she's bitching at everyone around her. She's still kinda cool overall, but every so often she's gonna diss one of her teammates, or punch one of her teammates in the face, or slap one of her teammates, and you're thinking, damn Lightning, why you gotta be like that? Then there's Snow, the shonen hero of the group. Like many shonen heroes, he's kinda likable, but not all that interesting. He's the one who wants to marry Lightning's sister, and thus bears the brunt of her bitching. Next is Hope, whose mother was killed in an attack, and for some reason, he's blaming Snow for it. This was really annoying, even being aware of the quintessentially Japanese theme of having to pin the blame on somebody. And what makes it even more annoying is that Hope's always talking shit about Snow behind his back, but when it comes time to face Snow, Hope's always running away. This goes on for like half the game, and it just gets really irritating. The one benefit to all this is that all of Hope's bitching makes Lightning's bitching look a lot milder, and in fact, when Lightning and Hope are together in the game, they actually get along. Somehow the two bitchy characters cancel each other out. Hope also turns into a really useful character in battle, so while I never liked him, by the end of the game I couldn't really hate him either. Saz was my favorite character. He's the cool uncle of the group, and even though he's also a humorous character, you can also take his drama seriously. He carries a chocobo chick around with him, which is probably my second favorite character. Vanille is your typical Final Fantasy Genki girl. There's not much else to say. In fact, throughout the whole game, I actually called her Pinello. I could have just as easily called her Riku, Selphie, or Yuffie. She's fun, but there's nothing really unique about her, plus her voice was a little annoying at times. Perhaps by design, since she did copy a lot of mannerisms that you'd hear from a lot of Japanese voice actresses, it's just that these mannerisms come off as a lot weirder in English. The final playable character is Fang. Now, she's pretty cool, but her role in the story is basically limited to being Vanille's BFF and Yuri's shipmate. My one complaint about Fang is that she had to wear a sari, and if you have enough chubby aunts wearing saris all the time, you will understand that these things can never look good on anyone under any circumstance, ever. The enemy cast is pretty weak. There's this hot scientist chick I had high hopes for, she turned out to be a dud. Sid had the ugliest hair ever. The guy with the gray hair was totally pointless. Finally, there's Bartandalus, who is basically the Seymour of this game. There's a lot of Final Fantasy X influence in this game, and I'll get to a few more examples later. Bartandalus plays his role just fine, but there's really no appeal or mystique about him there is about, say, a Kefka or a Sephiroth or even a Kuja. Overall, I gotta say this is the weakest enemy cast in any Final Fantasy game I've played. And side characters, aside from Lightning's sister, Saz's son, and Hope's mom, basically don't even exist. Alright, now let's take a look at the battle system. There's 6 job classes, and they all have weird names, so I'll just tell you what they do. They're physical attackers, magical attackers, healers, tanks, buffers, and debuffers. Even though there are only 6 classes, there's a good balance between them, and they're all relevant in their own way. Kinda reminds me of Valkyria Chronicles in that sense. Each character belongs to 3 of these 6 job classes. You can switch back and forth between job classes in battle, and you can only use certain job class abilities while you're in that job class. In that regard, it's kind of like the dress spheres from Final Fantasy X too. What makes this game unique is that you're managing all the characters at once rather than setting all their attacks and abilities individually. For example, instead of changing an attacker into a healer, you'd be changing the entire party from an attacking setup to a healing setup. These setups are called paradigms, and naturally they come with some advantages and some disadvantages. There are many times when you want to shift back and forth quickly between paradigms. For example, you'll very often want to switch between attacking and healing. It's much more convenient to change everyone at once rather than to change each individual character. The downside is that you have to set up all your paradigms before battle, so if there's a paradigm you'd like to use and you're in the middle of a battle and it's not set up, you don't get to use it. Your healer won't get to heal, your debuffer won't get to debuff, etc. For some reason, the game doesn't save the paradigms you set up between certain party members, so each time you switch in a new party member or take another one out, you have to reset all your paradigms. And the auto-generated paradigms were often not the ones I wanted to use, so it does take a little bit of time to get the exact paradigms you want. Another effect of this is that you're rarely going to want to switch party members because you're going to have to reset all your paradigms. Also, you're going to be more likely to stick with the paradigms you're already comfortable with because you're not going to want to waste time experimenting with new paradigms and resetting all your old ones. Yet another thing that discourages switching characters is that there are a few character combinations you have to have in order to be able to access every single job class. You either need the combination of Lightning, Fang, or Hope, or you need the combination of Saz, Snow, and Vanille. If you want to stick with Lightning as the lead character, you gotta use the combination of Lightning, Fang, and Hope just about all the time. Unless, of course, you're okay with giving up one of the job classes temporarily, but eventually you are going to want that class back in your party. And yet another reason why you're not going to want to switch characters often is that each character gets healed after battle. There's no need to switch in a fresh character if all the characters are already good to go for the next battle. Yet another reason why you're not going to switch characters much is that everyone gets experience points even if they didn't take part in the battle. On the bright side, this does avoid the problem of uneven leveling that's plagued a few Final Fantasy games in the past. So yes, the inconvenience of changing party members is my biggest complaint with the battle system, but I like just about everything else. With automatic healing after every single battle, you can fight as many battles as you want to instead of having to constantly worry about finding the next save point. There are no magic points in this game, so you can use as much magic as you want to. This is really great for a guy like me because I'm usually very cheap when it comes to magic points, and items as well, and money. There are these things called technique points, but you don't use techniques very often, so it's not usually a big deal. Summoning requires technique points, but summoning is so useless in this game that you're never going to bother. I've never been much into summoning in the first place, so I didn't really care. Now, it may sound like there's a lot to this battle system, and there sort of is, but at the beginning of the game, you can basically only attack, and each element of the battle system is introduced step by step from there. In a sense, it's kind of like Final Fantasy for dummies. You're just going to be button mashing X for the early parts of the game, and the full battle system doesn't open up until you're about halfway through. Even then, you're still going to be button mashing X a lot, because the game provides automatic commands for you that are supposedly optimized for your situation. Every so often you are going to disagree with the game's so-called optimization, but for the most part you're going to run with it, especially since the battles in this game can be very long because the enemies have extraordinarily high hit points. Your goal for most enemies is just hit them with relentless combos until they become staggered, which basically means that you've hit them with so many combos that everything becomes a critical hit. That's where you do most of your damage. It's a pretty cool twist on the usual battle system, and because you have to set up combos of different attacks, it forces a balance between physical attacks and magic attacks that you don't necessarily have in previous games. In previous games, I could get away with using nothing but strong physical attacks on most enemies. Here, against most enemies, physical attacks by themselves will get you absolutely nowhere. You're still going to stick to offensive strategies, however, because at the end of each battle, you're rated on how long the battle takes you to complete. While this was already more my style, it does also discourage the use of tanks, healers, buffers, and debuffers, which I was hoping to learn to appreciate more since I've always viewed them as second-rate job classes in other games. This game even broke some of the traditional Final Fantasy rules to make those secondary job classes more useful. I mean, status effects working on the final boss? Are you kidding me? I guess it's a good thing because bosses shouldn't automatically be immune to status effects, but it just feels so wrong. The way the game slowly introduces each aspect of the battle system to you, if you're an experienced gamer, none of this should trip you up. However, there was one aspect of it that I never quite got right, and that was leveling up weapons and accessories. Instead of finding or buying better weapons and accessories as the game goes on, you have to start out with base level weapons and accessories, and then level them up with other items you find throughout the game. Being really cheap with items and not being sure which accessories or weapons to level up, I only leveled up a few weapons and I never even touched the accessories until the end of the game. And since I was unwilling to look into a strategy guide for help, this is the one Final Fantasy game for which I never even came close to getting a single ultimate weapon. The characters level up through a bunch of connected rings that's very similar, in fact almost identical, to the Final Fantasy X sphere grid. After battle you collect points, and you apply those points to get new abilities and stats. I like the system just fine, just as I like the Final Fantasy X sphere grids, and in this game it gives you a very good sense of what level you need to be at what stage of the game, because there's a limit to how far you can expand until you've beaten certain bosses. My only complaint here is that towards the end of the game there is no good place to grind, and so it took forever to level up. All in all, this was a cool battle system, and I gotta applaud Square Enix for being willing to take a few risks and deviate from tradition. Now let's talk about the world of Final Fantasy XIII. Here's where it got a lot of criticism for being linear, and much of it was quite justified. Now on one hand, I don't like long mazes, I don't like bitch work, and I don't like bullshit puzzle solving just for the sake of making a game non-linear. However, this game swung so far back in the opposite direction that the exploration of the world, if you want to call it that, was just really boring. There were two parts in particular that I found really offensive. First of all, the opening stage of the game, where it's literally linear. You're just walking straight down the street. It's terrible. The other area was the Ark, which is somewhere around level 9 or 10 or so. This area has a pretty cool looking room. The problem is it reuses that room a good 3, 4, 5 times until you're absolutely tired of it. The other linear areas of Cocoon didn't really bother me that much. I mean, you didn't really have to think to go through them, but at the same time they weren't aesthetically boring the way the linear streets were in the very first stage, nor were they repetitive. There were enough twists and turns and detours that kept it somewhat refreshing. Another problem here is that you couldn't return to old areas. Not that there was much to return to. I mean, there were no towns, and there weren't many side quests. But I guess if you want to do that, you can always play the sequels. Once you get to Pulse, which is the Earth below Cocoon, then things open up, you can return to areas, you can explore a lot. But there's no actual civilization down there, it's just wilderness. You're just running around endlessly, not having chocobos, and then when you finally get chocobos, you don't really need them anymore. There are a bunch of optional fights you can do down on Pulse, which is kind of like the hunts from Final Fantasy XII, and those were pretty fun, except for all the walking. The more of those you do, the more you can teleport, and that's why chocobos are effectively useless at the end, because you can just teleport anywhere you want to go a little bit faster. Finally, let's talk about the story. Every good story has 3 parts, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Final Fantasy XIII has a good beginning, a good ending, and little in the middle. At the very beginning of the story, there's a lot of plot, action, moving parts that really make it interesting from the get-go. After all the characters get together and have their first big fight, then it goes into sort of a character development mode. Still interesting, but not as exciting. It wasn't until the characters once again reunited and had another big fight that I considered the beginning of the story to be over. Little did I know, approximately half the game had already passed. Then the characters go down to Pulse, they run around the Arclight Steppe all day, they run into a tower for no reason, then they go to a village where nobody lives anymore. Nothing really happens with the plot at this point. Then they go back to Cocoon, have an awesome cutscene, and get up to a major boss, which I expect to mark the 2/3 point of the game. Turns out I had accidentally gotten up to the final boss. Never thought I'd say those words. Now in previous Final Fantasy games I'd been more heavily reliant on strategy guides, so it was much easier to know where I was in the story. But still, due to the lack of build-up, and also the fact there was a very little plot development on Pulse, I had no idea I was actually approaching the end of the game. So I fought the final boss, got my ass kicked, went back down to Pulse and leveled up a bit, also leveled up a few accessories, went back to the final boss and won pretty easily. The ending wrapped up everything in a very satisfying manner, and the ending song was catchy too. Definitely no complaints there. It's only that really empty middle of the story that got to me. Also the problem that the story and the battle system were never at their peak at the same time. When the story was strong at the beginning, the battle system was very limited, and then when the battle system finally opens up, the plot went nowhere. All in all, I found the game pretty addicting. I finished it in about a month, and given how blonde I am, that's pretty amazing. There is a lot of wasted potential here, but these things happen. Final grade, single plus. Since I was satisfied with the ending of Final Fantasy XIII, I thought I'm going to reopen the story by playing one of the sequels. This makes the next RPG I have on my list, Dark Souls. Now last time I decided to follow up a relatively easy RPG with a much tougher one, I ended up following up Kingdom Hearts with Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne. As you could tell from my review, it was a mediocre game. Here's hoping Dark Souls is much, much better.